approximate example here is that kid in your high school, we all had one, just played video games and ate Snickers bars and had like abs. And you're like, I hate you. Hey folks, Dr. Mike here with Renaissance Periodization, and today's video asks the question of how lean can somebody get? How lean can you get? And what are the inputs that go into such a thing? What are the determinants to say how lean you can get? Now, the first thing many people will say, and I used to do this all the time, is they'll hear something and they'll say, well, it's drugs, Dr. Mike. You just take drugs and you get lean, and that's what determines leanness, is how many drugs you take. And that's actually not true. There is a common misconception almost exclusively within people who do not compete in bodybuilding. The misconception is that natural bodybuilders cannot get as lean as people who are using drugs in bodybuilding. And that's false. If you pay attention to the sport of real natural bodybuilding, drug-free, you will realize that drug-free bodybuilders get limit lean, psychotically lean, nonsensically lean. If you need someone to look to for that example, just go on Instagram and type in Marvin Physique, Marvin the Martian from Hong Kong, a good friend of ours here at the channel. And he's lifetime drug-free. He's 5'9", and he weighs 154 pounds. Before you start accusing him of drug use, remember that. And he's as lean as anyone could ever hope to be. It's insane. He has like glutes on his face. It's really strange. So there's tons of other examples. Peter Fitchen comes to mind. You can Google him. A bunch of the people he coaches come to mind. Outrageously lean. Natural is absolutely possible. There is no drug that makes you leaner as a matter of course. There is no drug that can make you leaner than an properly adjusted calorie deficit and good diet can make you. The only question is, how much muscle do you have at the end of that process? If you diet to get ultra lean, drug-free, because you're not taking anabolic and other ergogenic drugs, you will not be as big muscularly before you start that diet as someone who was taking the drugs. And also, on the way down to getting as lean as possible, you will lose more muscle than someone who is actually taking tons of drugs. So you maybe weigh 165 pounds, whereas your theoretical counterpart in an alternate universe that's identical in every way, except that you took drugs in that universe, weighs 200 pounds. You can be just as lean on stage in both situations. So that is the deal. Now, of course, being 165 lean on stage versus 200 lean on stage, the whole process involved with that is way healthier if you do not take drugs. So remember, that big upside there is health. It's not actually leanness. So if you want to take drugs to get as lean as possible, you have to understand you don't actually need drugs to get as lean as possible. If you want to take drugs to be as muscular as possible at a given level of leanness, then yes, that is something that drugs can do. So if it's not drugs that we're going to be talking about here, that's out of the way. We have 5 other reasons at least that determine how far you can go in your personal journey, should you choose to take it, of getting as lean as you can. And the first one is genetics. And interestingly enough, in most circumstances, outside of one, which is appetite genetics, the genetic proclivity to store fat is not a huge determinant of how lean you can get because of how powerful the other factors we are going to discuss in a minute are. But genetics, so to put this another way, if you started out with suboptimal genetics and you kind of just a little bit thicker and chunkier by default, let's say you carry a 20% body fat just at your normal level, you're athletic, you train, you eat well, just 20%, that's what you are as a male, 30% as a female. With applying the other variables that we're going to talk about, you actually can probably get striated glutes. How difficult that is for you is going to be very different. How long it's going to take is going to be very different. So while that's a true statement, it's also a true statement to say that people with good genetics for being lean can get very, very lean with much less work. The approximate example here is that kid in your high school, we all had one, who was like 16 years old, didn't lift weights, just played video games and ate Snickers bars and had like abs, clear six-pack and bicep veins. And you were like, what? That's where you start your life? And then, he decides to get into bodybuilding when he's 22, and 4 weeks later, he has striated glutes. And you're like, I hate you. Dexter Jackson, famous example, up until he was in his late 30s, I believe, he had already won tons of pro shows, been to the Olympia a bunch of times. He just never did cardio. He just didn't do cardio. He had not done cardio. And he would diet for, I think, like 6 to 8 weeks. He would just clean up his diet and voila, glute striations within 2 weeks, contest conditioning within 6 to 8. That's a real thing. That's a real thing. That's genetics. Second thing that determines how lean you can get is how long your fat loss phase is. Some people will do 6 weeks or 8 weeks of fat loss dieting at 0.5% or 1% of loss per week, and they'll be like, oh man, like I got pretty lean, but gee whiz, I wish I'd get leaner. Well, you just diet longer. Up to 12 weeks of dieting can make a really, really big change. And a lot of times people in contest prep for bodybuilding, they'll do 14 or 16 weeks of prep, sometimes 20 weeks of prep. Well, 20 weeks of fat loss dieting is tough, very, very tough, and very perilous for your probability to just rebound and get fat again. But if you handle those concerns well, people see that your transformation from off-season to your show, and they're like, oh my God, how did you do it? It's like, what? If you diet for 20 weeks, losing 0.75% of your body weight each week on average, you're going to get a lot leaner. It's kind of a no-brainer, but it must be said, like, yeah, this is how it happens. And people ask you if you're really good at dart throwing. And they ask you, how'd you get so good at dart throwing? Like, the chances are, yes, you have genetic proclivity to be more accurate at short distances. Fine motor skill is very good. Fine motor control. But also, like, you probably practice dart throwing a while. And like, after you practice anything a while, you get pretty fucking good at it, right? Next, and more importantly, the determinant of how lean you can be, and this is maybe one of the most real world things to say in this lecture, is how many fat loss phase, maintenance, or even a little bit of massing in there phase sequences can you stack together over the long term. Because if you start at a 20% fat and you get down to 14% fat through a nice long hard fat loss phase, you're a lot leaner than you were, but you're not objectively very lean for a male. You're like, like athletic and healthy and everything's great, look great. But you could say to yourself after that fat loss phase, you're like, all right, go to maintenance. And you say, geez, I don't know how the contest bodybuilders do it. I don't know how really lean people do it. I did this whole fat loss phase. And I'm like, where am I? I'm like, still 14%. No, but hold on a second. You take 2, 3, 4 months in a maintenance phase, maybe even a slow massing phase. You restart your next fat loss phase at 16% body fat, and you end up at 12% after that. Well, wow, significantly leaner. Maintain. The next fat loss phase takes you to 9%. I know it's possible because I've done this multiple times with people and a bunch with myself. If you just don't mass up to the same percent body fat every time you do a fat loss phase, if you can even shave off 1 net percent body fat in each one of those cycles, hopefully something like 2 or 3% per macro cycle, after a while, because you never quite come up to the old level that you were at, you can get really, really lean. And you can find yourself in a position where you're at 10% body fat at the end of a maintenance phase, and you're like, I think I'm in a position to like get show lean, and you may very well be. So a lot of times people look at people who are really lean, and here's the whole point of this part of the talk, and they go, oh my God, like that's crazy. That guy's so lean. That's not in me. Well, hold on a second. How many sequential phases of fat loss have they gone through? A lot of contest bodybuilders report, especially in their later years, in their late 30s and early 40s, that getting lean to them is actually very easy at this point because they've done it so much and because they just never get very fat again after their show. I mean, like you get down to 4% for a bodybuilding show, you can eat like a fucking pig for 2 months and come up to 9% and like run out of room to eat. Like, I don't want to eat anymore. I still have veins in my abs and a semblance of glute detail from the side. This is just my life now. But you earned that life because you did so many months and years of sequencing fat loss phase, maintenance and mass, fat loss phase, maintenance and mass. And that maintenance and mass doesn't come up to where that last fat loss phase took the fat off of you. So it's a net loss by a small margin every single time. You structure enough of that together and all of a sudden it's like, yeah. You think about it, if you were a wrestler and you went to a 2-week wrestling camp during the summer, it's going to make you way better at wrestling for sure. But how much better can one wrestling camp really make you? Not much. How much better can one fat loss phase make you? How much leaner? Plenty, but something it can't hold on to. But if you do like 4 wrestling camps in a given season, you're going to be a stud. Just the same way, if you do 4 sequenced fat loss, mass phase, maintenance, repeat, and each one is 2 to 3% lower in body fat, gee whiz, 2 years later, you're going to be like 8% body fat lower just walking around. That is one hell of a way to get really, really lean. It's the secret. So make sure that you know that. And if you ever doubt yourself about, well, I can never get as lean, it's not all one shot. You don't start at 30% body fat and you're like, whatever, I just got to get to as lean as I can and that's all I can get. That maintenance phase at the end, a little slow mass, means you don't have to come back up to the level of body fat you used to be, and the next diet is easier and easier and so on. So easier, not psychologically easier. You get better results with it. You are leaner every single time. Next concern, point number 4, in determining how lean you want to get is how much muscle you want to trade off. This is a point that's pertinent especially to folks in competitive bodybuilding, folks that are trying to get really lean for holidays or something like that, like for the summer. Everyone reaches at some point this maybe 4 or 6 weeks out where their training is not of a very high quality anymore. It's maybe not slipping, but it's like my training could be better if I ate more food. My training could be better if I slowed down my rate of loss. I would not get as a little bit weaker during the end of prep as I could be. And that's a fork in the road. If you choose to go right and you eat a little bit more, slow down your rate of loss, you're going to get very lean and you're going to keep all of your muscle and it's going to be amazing. If you take the fork in the road that leads left, you're going to lose potentially a little bit of muscle. You can gain back all of it within weeks after the diet ends and you go back into an intelligent massing phase. So don't worry about not long-term loss. But if short-term you can sacrifice a little bit of strength and a little bit of fullness, you can continue that deficit and you will get fucking lean to a level that you thought, oh yeah, this is crazy. I did this at my last show where I got nice and dry for the first time in my life and lean enough to where I started the diet at some point around 240 pounds. I was on stage at 216, 217 pounds. That's really small. I did not like seeing. I stepped on the scale. It was 216.5 or something. And I was like, fuck, I'm tiny. But oh my God, was I shredded to the fucking bone. Do you want to get lean or not? Ideally, would you get lean and be like Big Ramy where he's 290 on stage? Yes. But you might not have that for the other reasons, genetics, drugs, etc. And thus, if you really want to get lean and you're willing to trade off a little bit of short-term muscle and strength, it'll be worth it is what I'm trying to say. Because you'll get so much leaner that the overall look will be like, wow. If you see a guy that's pretty, if you're into competitive bodybuilding, you see a guy that's pretty lean, but not very, very lean, you're like, oh, that guy looks great. How much does he weigh? 220, great. You see a guy that's very, very lean and it turns out he weighs 207, you don't ask him for his body weight. You don't care. Because if he walks out on stage next to the guy that's pretty lean, you're like, there's one guy in the show and that's the lean guy. First place, get out of here. Nobody cares how much you weigh. When you're that lean, it's worth it. It's worth it for that last little bit. This is a lesson I wish I knew 10 years ago when I started bodybuilding formally and competing. I wish I knew that extra bit of muscle loss at the end and strength loss was worth that insane, huge difference in stage look.
Training for muscle growth is never going to be the same.
Lastly, the last variable to determine how likely is it that you're going to get very lean is, of course, psychology, and it's a really, really big one. Not everyone has it in them at any given point in their life to push hard and long in a deficit, to push hard and long in sequential deficits that are separated by maintenance and or massing phases. Another thing about psychology is how bad your appetite gets. Ravenous appetite can really just prevent you from getting into that last weird low single-digit area, which is like a strange, bizarro world. The thing is, appetite is mostly genetic as well, so that actually goes back up to genetics. But nowadays, we have drugs like semaglutide and tirzepatide that can probably just knock that out, and it's not really a concern anymore. So back to that. In most cases, not all, some genetically gifted people really can just get insanely lean with minimal effort, or they just lucked out that their appetite isn't that high, so just kind of like train and eat high-protein foods, and voila, they have striated glutes. But in most cases, the people who get extremely lean, and in almost all cases, the people who started out not very lean to get extremely lean, they're just very mentally resilient. So if you ever ask, like, man, how does that guy so lean? A part of the answer is, that guy's got fucking balls. His balls have balls. And that girl, she's got ovaries on top of her ovaries or some shit like that. It just takes a lot. And it pays off. And it's not the kind of teeth-grinding resilience like, I'm going to do this. It's more of an ability to remain calm as the world around them crashes apart. They feel like they don't have any energy. That's okay. I didn't expect to have energy. I feel a little loopy and lost at work. That's okay. I front-loaded most of my work because I knew the last 4 weeks was going to be terrible. Their training, they're not as strong as they used to be. That's okay. I know that I've calculated this trade-off to point number 4. I'm willing to trade it off. It's okay that I'm not at my very best in every other area of life, and then I'm entering into this very dark, desperate world of exotic leanness. And I can, what is that like Christian prayer? Like, yea, shall walk through the valley of the whatever the fuck and not be whatever, because God's got my back. You know what I'm saying? That shit. That's some wisdom. You got to have that shit to go in with you, because shit will get really hard. And the people that survive that to end up on the other side, lean as shit, they can be calm and relaxed when everything around them and inside them is screaming, stop the diet. This isn't worth it. You don't want to get this lean. If you could do that, if your genetics are decent, if you can do it over the long term with multiple sequential phases, you too, Mr. Viewer, Mrs. Viewer, Ms. Viewer, and Miss MISS Viewer can get much, much, much leaner than you think. And I'll leave you with that and see you guys next time.